Alright everybody, here we are with, I guess this will be LavaGen video 2. So this is going to be a complete setup starting with the stainless steel mesh. We're going to oxidize the mesh and we're going to get this whole thing set up, rocking and rolling. And that'll leave video 3 to be the review. So here's the LavaGen. I'm going to set it down here. The first thing that we need to do is have a piece of stainless steel mesh. This is 400 mesh. This is about the size that I use. It's got a little something on it from sitting on my desk here, a little bit of a spot. I don't measure this out, with the exception that when I cut it, I usually try and make sure that I leave myself plenty of extra room to work. You can always shorten, trim it up to shorten it, but you can't make it any longer. So I use a piece about this big. Never measured it, just kind of eyeball it and go from there. So let's fire up the torch and we'll go ahead and get this going. When I do this, what I usually do is hold it firmly with a tweezers and just lightly, all we're going to do here is lightly, and this is kind of hard, the camera's in front of where I'm trying to shoot this, we're just going to lightly pass over the entire thing once or twice on both sides. You don't need to, you know, completely torch this black. I don't quench this in water or anything. Just be careful not to burn yourself. If you're using a tweezers or something, you're going to want to make sure that, sorry, I'm just repositioning this here. Make sure that you don't get it so close to the tweezers that the tweezers conducts heat to your hand. So we don't want anybody to burn themselves. I hope you can hear this over the sound of the torch. I'm just kind of lightly going over this a couple of times here. And, you know, both sides a bit. Trying to get the whole thing. And that's going to be it. So, you know, at that point, I'm really done with the torch. I'm not going to go ahead and really do anything more. Now, this cools pretty quickly. All right, so we have this oxidized. Here is our mesh. And what we're going to do is kind of, you can see it's already kind of starting to be a little bit round. So I'm just going to start to bend an edge flat here. Curl it up a little bit on one side, and then I'm just going to slowly start working it up and rolling it. So what we'll find here, some people like to do it around a paper clip, so you can hold a paper clip here, try and help keep it nice and straight. I generally don't do that. In fact, you can roll this so tight that if you get it completely solid, you're in really good shape. You don't have to have, you know, you can see here kind of a tube down the middle. That's not necessary. The capillary action of the stainless steel is so good that even if this ends up being a completely solid wick, which mine isn't going to, partly because I'm just trying to do this away, so far away from my face, you're going to be in good shape. So I'm really just trying to get this nice and tight and even. I want it to be even and tight, just as tight at one end as it is at the other. So once we get this rolled up, we're going to want to test fit this before we go any farther to make sure that it's going to fit in here. So mine fits in, but you can see it's kind of snug yet. In fact, you know, I kind of really have to put some pressure to go through it. So what I like to do is just take my fingers, just kind of roll it and try and tighten it up this way a bit. You don't want to do this too much. You want to be careful as you're doing it that you don't start pressing one end out. So maybe just take it and tap it a bit, try and keep it straight. And you want to get it tight enough that it's going to fit in here. And it's going to not fall through, but not take a lot of pressure to get through the wick hole either. So you can see mine is, that's better, but it's still a little snug. So I'm just going to take this off the camera for a second and roll it between my hands. And try and keep it real straight. So what we don't want is to get either end of this, you know, starting to poke out, so you're almost making it into more of a funnel shape. And that's looking good. So that, you know, you can see I can easily get this in and out, but it's not just going to fall down on its own. So we're pretty good here. At this point, occasionally, depending on how I feel about the oxidation, I may just hit it quickly with a lighter, just to make sure that I don't have any uneven spots. You can see it looks a little bit lighter at the end here. So what I may do, I think it's here somewhere under my mess. Maybe it's not. I don't have one handy. So I could just use the torch again. And really, I mean, you don't need to get this glowing hot or anything. Just enough to darken it up a bit more. Notice I haven't put juice on this. We're not dunking it in water. When you have it kind of in this tube or straw shape, it is going to be a little bit hotter to the touch, so you just want to be conscious of that. So I'm going to grab a tweezers, just kind of fire up the other end a bit. And really that's about it in terms of anything I'm going to do with the mesh. That's really about it. All right, so we've got our wick all set up, and we did a test fit to make sure that we're the right size. So the next thing to do is to make sure that we get this set to go on our device. If you look here, you can see the connector is recessed, and I've kind of backed it out intentionally. So it's all adjustable through this top screw, which is a pretty fantastic feature because that's going to let us line up that wick where our air hole will reasonably be over a button on a mod. You know, if you've got a bottom button mod, not as big of a deal. Here on the Pro Vari, what I'm going to want to do is line up my wick hole with the button here because I like to fire it with my thumb. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up. So you want to screw it down, you know, just hand tight, then back it off to the point where you want the wick hole to sit. So mine's pretty close to being set where I want it. Oops. Once you've got it set, go ahead and hold the actual LavaGen with your hand, hold it firmly, and go ahead and tighten this screw on top down. Now this is going to push out that center pin and make sure that the center pin is making contact on the atomizer connection to your device. In order to make sure that this is going to stay in place, what we're going to do is this right here, so it looks like, you know, a spacer on the bottom, but this piece right here is actually threaded, so it's going to lock in place. So I'm going to grab a needle nose pliers. Again, you want to make sure you get a firm grasp of the body here, and you just want to tighten that up. And that's going to hold this in place because there's not going to give it any extra room for the center post to potentially move. So once you've got that locked into place, what this is going to allow us to do is make sure that it's set right above the button, and mine got a little bit off center here, just trying to do it on camera. So when we back this off, we can take it off, you know, spin it around, what have you, go to put it back on, and it's going to end up in the exact same spot. So there you go. Mine's just a little bit off center again. That's just trying to do it while looking through the viewfinder on a camera. But we're going to let that sit here for now. That's going to be pretty good, or good enough for the purposes of showing you how it works. All right, so we have this adjusted. I've got it back here on the base. The next thing for us to do is to wrap our coil. So I have a piece of 30 American wire gauge Canthal and a 3/32 inch drill bit. These are incredibly cheap. I got a pair of them for about $2 at Walmart. 3/32 inch drill bit is just the exact perfect size here to slip in, and it's going to be a great base for us to build our coil around. So grab the end that would go in the drill, so not the beveled end here, and leave yourself a little bit of room on both ends to work. Go ahead and wrap your wire around this. The neater you get it here, the easier it's going to be to build your coil. I like to use about 5 wraps, which usually gives me about a 2 ohm coil. And go ahead and scrunch it up. Now it's really important, the neater you keep it in these early stages, the easier that building this is going to be when you're all finished. So I like to kind of bunch it up a bit, just with my fingers, and you know, get it fairly tight, not, you know, so tight you're not going to be able to get it off, but, you know, get it kind of as tight as you kind of can here at this point. So get it lined up, get it pretty neat. That's, you know, fairly neat here. You should have one leg of wire hanging off of either side. As an extra bonus step here, you can take this, put your finger here, leave it about 1/8 of an inch of wire, and at that point put a little bend in it, 90-degree bend on both legs of wire. Just going to help us kind of have a jumping off spot when we go to connect this to our post terminals, and also kind of helps keep it from getting pulled too tight when we do that. So you should be able to see kind of an L on both sides. You can also do that with the tweezers once you get it all situated. So at this point we can drop the bit into the wick hole, just kind of paying attention to where your coil legs are going to line up. So as you can see here, this fits in here and gives us a nice base to get our coil built on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and at the point where our L's are on the bottom, or the negative, we're going to line that up above the spacer and under the screw. So take it at that L point, stick it under the screw, and wrap it around. Just kind of hold it with a finger or your thumb on your other hand. You don't want it super tight, you just want it snug enough that it's going to stay in place, and you don't want extra bulges here around the coil. So if it's a little too loose, you're going to want to just pull it a little bit tighter. But again, the trick here is not over tightening it. We're going to do the same thing here on the top. So where we've got that kind of L bend in it is going to be our contact point. At this point, if you haven't pinched it off, put that L in it, you can just simply hold the wire with your thumb, use a tweezers to really get that nice little kink in there. Doesn't really add a ton of length or anything to the coil, just keeps it from getting pulled too tightly while you're wrapping this all up. So we want this piece of wire here above the spacer because the coil's got some height to it, and we're just going to use a finger to kind of pull it around, keep it in place, and you may need to adjust the drill bit just a little bit to get the thumb screw to set right here. Here it's kind of rubbing, and go ahead and tighten that down. At this point, what you want to make sure you have going is that you don't have the legs of the coils touching each other or touching the opposite posts. That will create a short. And you also want to make sure that they're not touching the base here of the atomizer, or that's going to give you some problems as well. I got this wrapped up here a little more than I probably wanted. So I'm just going to loosen this a smidge, pull it back a bit, tighten it back down. There we go. So we've got it all hooked up here. You can see my coil got a little sloppy. So this, again, you want to take your time here and really kind of adjust, get everything set up right before you ever apply power to it. Because the neater you are with this now, the better you're going to be in the final stages. So I'm just adjusting this, getting it all set up nice and neat. Now at this point, again, just check your wiring, make sure that they're not touching the opposite post, they're not touching the base piece. Kind of leave these, I like to leave some lengths here because if I need to make adjustments, it's easier to be able to grab that whole piece. All right, so we have our coil essentially set up here, and it's looking pretty good. Made some adjustments to it, so it is pretty even here. Pull this off and get it to focus in. So the next step here is really to take this and put it on your device. Now, what you want to make sure you do is, at some point you're probably going to want to check the resistance. If you're worried about those things, if it's going on a mechanical device, you're going to be okay. You're not going to have to worry too much. Just, kind of have a ballpark idea of where your coil's at. So what I'm going to do is just meter this out on the ProBerry. Should be somewhere in the 2 ohm neighborhood. So if we take a look here, and we get to atomizer reading, 2.2 ohms. So the other thing, before you fire it up or do anything you do, just want to make sure that your extra lengths of wire, which I like to leave until the last possible minute, they're not touching the opposite posts that they're coming off of, and they're not touching each other, and that they're also not touching the top plate of the LavaGen rebuildable section, because any of those will cause a short in it, and you want to avoid that. So the other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you don't have too much power here running to it. So I'm really going to tone this down. It's at 4.5 volts is where I had it set. I'm going to bring this all the way down to 3.5. Oh, I passed it. We'll go 3.4 volts. You may be saying, why so low? But what we want to do is we just want to fire this and make sure that it's going to light up evenly. We don't want any hot spots or shorts in the coil. So if it's not firing evenly, go ahead and take some extra time here at this step and make sure that you get it firing nice and evenly. If you've got to adjust, most likely it's because you've got a wire too tight. But really at this point, without the coil in, it should be firing up pretty evenly. So now we're going to carefully take the mesh, and insert it into the coil. And I like to just kind of spin it so it it's less prone to catching. So just spin it in whatever direction. It should go in pretty easy. You should be able to move it in and out, but if it just falls right through, go back and just fluff out your mesh a bit. So anytime you do anything that's around the coil, you want to fire it again just to make sure that you're still lighting up evenly. And you can see there, I've got a really hot spot, which could be from two things. Could be just too tight for the coil in that spot, or it could be that you don't have, you've got a spot that's not oxidized well on your mesh. So if I pull this out, let's just test fire it again. You can see there with no mesh in, glows pretty evenly. Go ahead and slip this back in, just at this point in it. So at that point, it's lighting pretty evenly. That's, really looking to me like I've got a spot that maybe just isn't oxidized terribly well. So let's slide this back in, fire it again, and at this point, it's firing pretty well. Now if I spin this, I bet I've got a spot in here. And this spot right there is just not oxidized very well. So you've got two options. You can pull this out, try and take a lighter or a torch back to that spot. So I happen to just have a lighter here as well. Lighter is nice just for a quick touch-up where you don't want to have to break out the torch. It's a little bit easier to control. Again, we're never, or I guess never, you may find that you like the torch and quench method, or you like to put a little e-liquid on it and burn that off. I generally just do about this much. I mean, I don't do much more in terms of oxidizing that mesh than you saw me do right there. So let's go ahead and, whoops, this end seems to be the better end to slide in. So I'm just going to get it slid in again, test this. Make sure that you're not making contact with the center post here. And if for whatever reason it sneaks into the base, make sure it's just not touching there because it has the potential to ground you out. So I'm lighting this up, and that is looking real nice. So because it's looking so nice, we've got two options here. We can go ahead and we can snip off these wires. There's a couple ways we can do that, or we can first shorten up the wick. I am going to actually shorten up the wick first, simply because that gives me a little bit more time with the extra wires in case I need to go back and make an adjustment. So what I'm going to do here is kind of mark the spot with just a little pinch where I'm going to want to cut this off. So you don't want this sticking out too much above your coil. So I'm going to kind of pinch it right there as just a guide as to about where I'm going to want to snip this. Now you got to be careful when you pinch it. I pinched mine a little bit and it made it hard for me to pull out. So now if we look here, you can see the pinch is kind of right there. So I'm going to grab a scissors and I'm going to snip it. I always recommend you go and you snip a little bit higher than you think you're going to want it, because you can't go backwards. If you snip too much, you're stuck there. You can't make the coil longer. But if you don't snip it short enough, you can go back and adjust it again. So we're going to go ahead and slide this back into our coil here. Again, you don't want to force this because you don't want to get your coil out of whack. And if you didn't get this round enough, you can see mine is still a little bit out of round there. Just go back and, generally just rolling it between your fingers will do. You may need to go back to rolling it between your hands like we did earlier. Generally, just a little bit of back and forth in your fingers is enough to kind of get it rounded back out. Some people also like to cut the bottom to make it a nice diagonal. I've kind of stopped doing that lately because it always gets your bottom out of round and it makes it harder to get that mesh back in when it's time. That's looking better. And sometimes if you work it a little bit from the bottom, you can see I pushed a little bit and it kind of spread my coils out. I'm also trying to do this quickly so I don't make this a 8-hour video. So every step of the way, anytime you've done anything with your coil, you're going to want to fire it again. You can see now I've got hot spots again. So I'm going to want to go back and just kind of try and rotate the wick around. Find the right spot where it's going to light up evenly. That looks pretty good. It's a little bit brighter in the middle. I'm just going to give it another tiny rotation here. Oop, and there we got a spot. And that looks to me to be pretty good. Now obviously too, we are just dry firing this. You don't want to fire it forever and ever. It does look like I've got just a small piece here that's not lighting up very well at the top. So just going to try and take tweezers and press it away from there a little bit. See if we can free that up. You can see there off that I've got a little piece that's not looking like it wants to fire. Part of that could be the way it's connected. Again, you know, I'm trying to be careful. Oh, that's not a good spot. I'm trying to be careful and do this, but I'm also trying to do it quickly. And I'm looking at the viewfinder of a camera, adding an extra layer of complexity. So I think we're going to call it good there. Just for the purposes of doing this video, you can take all the time here you want. The more time you take, the better coil and mesh setup you're going to have. So at this point, you can carefully kind of spin these wires until they snip off. Just be careful that you don't pull it so far out that you end up pulling it out from under the connection screw or the thumb screw. But generally, just a little wiggle will snip it off. You could also take the nail clippers again, slide this in there, and use this to snip it off nice and short, like I just did. But really, I think we're in pretty good shape here. Again, we're not applying a lot of power, just a little bit to kind of get it going. So let's get some liquid over here. Another step, whoops, that some people like to take is to just put a drop or two of liquid on it and make sure that it still fires nicely. Sorry, the syringe tip came out of my bottle. So, get in there. All right. So I'm just going to put a drop or two of liquid on here. And just see how that fires and see if that causes any issues. So that's looking pretty good. At this point, I think we can safely go ahead and put the tank body on. So this isn't the standard polycarbonate tank body. This is from Kathy over at Bedazzled. So this is glass. When you put this on here, go ahead and push it all the way into place. If you spin it a bit, no worries, right? Because the bottom cap, tube, top cap are all separate pieces. But this air hole here, we want to get lined up over our coil. So I'm just going to spin this around until that happens. So there, the air hole is lined up directly over the coil. And now I'm going to go ahead and just fire it one more time. Again, anything you do that may potentially bump that coil until you get it all set up, you want to just go back and give it a test fire. So now I think we're ready to put some liquid here. And I'm going to tip this around a bit. You may also want to just check and make sure that when you kind of have it tipped at an angle, that the coil is, you know, picking up liquid, that it's wicking properly. Everything's looking good there. So we can go ahead and put the top cap on. When you do this, you want to be real careful because what you don't want to have happen is the top cap pressing down on your mesh. And you can see mine looks to be just clear of that. I don't think it's got any pressure on there. Maybe just ever so slightly. So I would maybe want to just trim this wick just a hair. And once you do that, if you bump the coil when you're putting your top cap on, you're going to want to fire it again just to make sure everything's looking good. And that's all there is to it. So next up will be the actual review.